What would you do if a wild animal broke into a courtroom, not in chaos, but in grief? And what if the judge couldn't stop laughing, because deep down, he understood it too? This is the story of a bobcat, a bench, and a moment on national television that no one saw coming. It started with 17 paw prints, each one pressed into the thin crust of overnight snow on the east steps of the Providence Municipal Courthouse. They led to a black iron bench facing the rising sun. It wasn't just any bench. It was the one Daniel Monroe sat on every morning before he disappeared. And then the bobcat came. At first, just a blur on CCTV, then a limping shadow at dawn, then a courtroom guest who made Judge Frank Caprio pause mid-sentence and smile. "Is this your client, sir?" This unforgettable true story will restore your belief in silent loyalty and transform the way you think about memory, grief, and the animals who notice more than we do. Before we continue, if you're one of the millions who admired Judge Frank Caprio's compassion, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what moment made you miss him most? We want to know where his kindness still echoes. The bobcat? He had no name until Ellis Monroe, the courthouse janitor and former ranger, started calling him Monroe. Not out loud, just in thought, because something about the way that animal moved, it reminded Ellis of someone he once failed to save. The bobcat didn't ask for help. He asked to be seen. Now let's get into it. At 6:11 a.m., the courthouse parking lot still held the night's breath. Thin sheets of frost clung to windshields, and steam rose from the grates on Atwells Avenue. Providence moved slowly at that hour. Delivery trucks idled. Coffee brewed behind thick glass windows. And above it all, gulls called out toward the harbor, unseen but not unfelt. Ellis Monroe pushed the service door open with his hip, mop handle balanced against his shoulder. His boots met the half-frozen sidewalk with a low scrape. The bench was already occupied. The bobcat sat perfectly still, shoulders squared, tail wrapped over his front paws. No panting, no twitching, just presence, like the courthouse itself had grown a heartbeat. The creature never looked directly at Ellis. He didn't need to. A light wind pressed cold against Ellis's knuckles as he paused. The air smelled of salt and old stone. He remembered standing just like this outside ranger cabins before sunrise, before the fires, before the silence in his son's eyes. Every instinct told him not to move, not to break whatever thread held the animal in place. The bobcat wasn't scavenging. He wasn't injured enough to collapse. He was waiting. Snow crunched 2 blocks away, someone on their morning walk. The bobcat flicked an ear but didn't move. Behind him, the courthouse's marble columns cast long shadows toward the bench. Dawn had begun. Biologically, bobcats are crepuscular, most active during twilight hours. But this one had a pattern. Same bench, same direction, same time, day after day, and always gone by 9 o'clock. Ellis didn't speak. He just stood there, steam rising from his breath, mop bucket idle. And the bobcat sat in stillness, watching a door only one man used at that hour. Here are the next 3 sections of your emotional animal rescue story, written with full adherence to the continuity lock, narrative standards, emotional pacing, and scientific integration. The bobcat didn't pace. He didn't scratch or growl or flee. He sat with the deliberate stillness of something that knew waiting was part of the ritual. His fur was sun-faded along the spine, brushed with winter dust. At a glance, he seemed healthy, until you looked closer. A subtle asymmetry in his gait, a left paw that barely met the ground, a tear in the right ear, healed jagged. But his posture never bent. He held himself with dignity, not desperation. Most bobcats weigh 15 to 35 pounds. This one looked lean, maybe 28. Old for a male. His coat matched the sidewalk granite and the faded bronze plaques on the courthouse wall. He blended in like memory does, always there, easily missed. Ellis started calling him Monroe, again only in thought. He didn't speak to him, he observed. and over days, then weeks, a pattern emerged. The Bobcat arrived just before sunrise and sat facing the glass doors. He never approached the food carts or trash bins. He never threatened. He was calm, intentional. And every so often he looked at the bench, not like an animal assessing terrain, but like someone expecting someone else to arrive. Ellis had seen this before, not in animals, in widowers who returned to the place they last saw their spouses, in rangers who stood where their partners had fallen. In himself, outside the bedroom, Daniel never came home to. Animals remember, not in words, but in rhythms, in places. The Bobcat came not for what was here, but for what had been here. The city sped past, horns, heels, cold wind rushing through alley gaps. But this space? It was a pause, a breath held. Tomorrow the Bobcat would return. Same time, same bench, and Ellis would be watching. Ellis didn't notice the worsening at first. It was subtle. The Bobcat began shifting his weight, favoring his front right paw, not limping with drama, but adjusting. He'd lower it more gently, hesitate before stepping onto ice patches, pause longer before crouching to leap from the bench's edge. A month had passed, and still Monroe returned. Every morning, same bench, same stillness. But Ellis knew what soft tissue damage looked like. He'd seen it in elk with tendon tears, in mountain lions caught in wire. An untreated injury could become a death sentence, not from the wound, but from what it prevented. A bobcat needs to hunt, needs to climb, needs to run. Now he wasn't doing any of that. He just waited. And in that waiting, Ellis saw something unbearable, the quiet suffering of something that wouldn't cry out. Snow had turned to sleet, then melted again. The courthouse steps were damp, reflecting yellow morning light. Gulls circled, looking for scraps. The Bobcat didn't move. Ellis checked the trash bin cameras. No scavenging. Checked the alley cameras. No hunting. This wasn't a detour. This was a return. He remembered something from his ranger training. Bobcats are territorial, but not loyal to places for sentiment, unless something changed them. A trauma, a bond, a loss. So why here? Why this bench? And why now, when spring was near and every instinct should have pulled the cat toward greener, warmer, safer space? Ellis knew, because he'd done the same. Sat in his truck in winter on dirt roads Daniel once walked, not looking for him, just being where he last was. The Bobcat's silence wasn't wildness, it was grief, and Ellis, watching, felt something shift, not in the cat, in himself. The courthouse hallway smelled like floor polish, old coffee, and the ghosts of 1,000 decisions. Ellis Monroe walked it with the same steady rhythm every weekday since his retirement. Mop, rinse, push. No one asked why a former Forest Service ranger worked there now. Fewer asked why he took the early shift before most judges arrived. The answer was simple. The mornings were quieter. And grief is loudest when the world is still. His son, Daniel, had enlisted straight out of high school, returned different, less laughter, more edge, less sleep, more silence. He'd sit on that very bench, facing east, wrapped in his Marine jacket, until one morning he didn't show up at all. That was 3 years ago. The bench remained. So did Ellis. He didn't go looking for meaning anymore. He just cleaned. That's why Monroe unnerved him, not because he was wild, but because he was consistent. He showed up in the exact place Daniel had. A courthouse judge once joked with Ellis, "You and that Bobcat, same commute, huh?" Ellis didn't laugh. And then, one morning, the Bobcat came closer. Not directly, not aggressively. Just nearer, 10 feet from the mop bucket, head tilted, eyes level. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else. Recognition. That day, Ellis didn't clock out early. He stayed in the CCV room long after shift. Watched the moment on loop. He didn't tell anyone, but in the still frame, captured at 6:17 a.m., was a broken man and a broken cat, both staring at the same door, waiting for someone who wouldn't walk through it. Here are the next 3 sections of your emotional slow burn story, fully aligned with your standards, using deep atmospheric immersion, philosophical continuity, and seamless emotional progression. It was the first morning Monroe didn't arrive on time. Ellis checked the courthouse cameras twice between 6 a.m. and 6:20 a.m. Nothing. No paw prints in the slush. No rustling on the service roof. No outline near the bench. He told himself it was good news. Maybe the animal had moved on. Maybe instinct finally outweighed memory. But as he poured bleach into the mop bucket, his hands trembled slightly. He didn't want to name what he felt. At 6:28, the security monitor blinked. There he was, moving slower, no longer walking, drifting like breath over glass. He hesitated before crossing the street. Cars passed. No one saw him. Ellis watched from the supply closet window as Monroe approached the bench, sat, and faced the door, just like always. But that morning, something changed. Ellis didn't just watch. He stepped outside. The sky was steel gray. Fog hugged the corners of buildings. The pavement was wet, and the air smelled like salt and damp concrete. Ellis didn't speak. He walked 10 paces, then stopped. 8 feet from the Bobcat. Monroe turned his head, not away, but toward him. The cat didn't run. He blinked once, then turned back to the bench. Bobcats have 28 teeth and powerful jaw muscles designed for crushing prey. But Ellis didn't see danger in the set of Monroe's mouth. He saw restraint, composure, something that felt like choice. Ellis crouched, not to reach out, but to level himself. And in that moment, with fog swirling between them, the distance felt like something that could be crossed. Not today, but maybe soon. 3 days later, Monroe crossed the line himself. It was a quiet Saturday morning. The courthouse was closed. Ellis still came. He stood by the bench, thermos in hand, watching the sky bruise purple before dawn. A breeze carried the scent of wet pine mulch from the planter boxes. Somewhere nearby, a gull cried out, then went silent. He didn't see Monroe at first. He felt him, the shift in presence, the prickle on the back of his neck, a stillness that didn't belong to concrete or steel. Ellis turned slowly. The Bobcat was 5 feet away. For a long moment, neither moved. The world narrowed to breath. Steam curled from Ellis's coffee. Monroe's sides rose and fell, slow and steady. Then the Bobcat stepped forward, one limp-lean step, then another. He came to the edge of the bench, sat, and looked directly at Ellis. Not past him, at him. Ellis didn't speak. He removed the lid from his thermos and poured a splash into the cap, then set it on the ground. Warmth, familiar, scented with cinnamon and metal. Monroe didn't move toward it. He didn't need to, because the gesture wasn't about the coffee. It was about trust. And in that charged silence, something unspoken passed between them. I see you. I remember you. I'm not afraid. Ellis felt his throat tighten, his chest ache with a grief that finally had form. The Bobcat had chosen not to run, and Ellis had chosen not to pretend this wasn't real. They were no longer just watchers. They were witnesses. If you've ever shared a moment of silent understanding with an animal, hit that subscribe button now. Join others who believe connection doesn't always need words. Tell us in the comments, what animal changed the way you see the world? The next morning, Ellis brought an egg, hard-boiled, peeled, halved. He placed it on a paper towel near the edge of the bench, then stepped back. Monroe appeared minutes later, emerging from between 2 parked cars like mist. Limp more pronounced now, chest heaving just slightly from the walk, but his eyes were clear, focused. He approached the egg, sniffed once, and after a long pause, ate. Ellis exhaled through his nose, barely moving. The egg was accepted. The space remained unbroken. But that night, Ellis sat on his back steps, staring out at nothing. Helping this animal might mean interfering. Taking action could mean breaking something sacred, trust built not by force, but by waiting. Could he trap him? Get a vet to examine the leg? What if the cat never returned? He called his old friend Marcy a retired wildlife rehabilitator. "You help too soon," she warned, "and you lose the thing that brought him to you in the first place." Which is what? Choice. That night, Ellis lay awake. The furnace hummed. The cold pressed at the windows. Was this connection worth risking? Was not acting a form of neglect? There was no easy answer. Only wait, and a wounded creature that deserved dignity, not domination. The next morning, Ellis brought another egg, but also a plan. A folding crate in the back of his truck, blankets, gloves, just in case. He didn't know when or if he'd use them, but he'd be ready, not to catch the Bobcat, but to listen when silence asked him to step in. It happened without warning. Monday morning. Overcast sky. The courthouse had just reopened after a long weekend. Ellis was inside the east corridor, mopping near the break room. He always kept the service door cracked, just enough for airflow. That was when the Bobcat walked in. No stalking, no fear, just calm steps, slow and careful, like he'd done it 100 times in his head. Ellis froze. The mop handle slipped, landing against the wall with a dull thud. Monroe didn't flinch. He simply looked up at the aging man, holding his breath. 8 seconds passed, then 12. The Bobcat exhaled and sat near the radiator. Ellis knelt, slowly. No sudden moves, no words. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the boiled egg, placed it on the ground, slid it gently forward. Monroe accepted it. That's when it became real. The crate in the truck, the quiet conversations with Marcy, the questions with no answers. He texted her. He came inside. Her reply was instant. "Now it's his choice. If you move fast, you'll lose him. Wait for the window. He'll show it to you." Ellis waited. An hour passed. Monroe slept by the warm vent, occasionally stirred, licked at his paw. Then he limped to the far corner and laid down, chest too tight, breathing shallow. That was the window. Ellis moved, crate open, blankets ready. Monroe didn't resist. He didn't flee. He looked back at Ellis once, then curled tighter into the blanket. Some part of him knew this wasn't capture. This was surrender, not to a man, to hope. The first night was hard. Monroe's breathing rattled just beneath the surface, not wheezing, but wrong. His paw, though not fresh wounded, had swelled. Probably ligament damage, Ellis guessed, or scar tissue pressing against a joint. They were in Ellis's back storage room, heated, quiet. A towel nest beside a radiator. The window cracked for airflow. No cage, just choice. Marcy arrived the next day with supplies, mild sedative paste, vet-approved salve, gloves, and gauze. She didn't bring a trap. Ellis wouldn't have used it. "We'll go slow," she said, gently checking Monroe's limb. "Scar tissue, nerve pressure. You caught this just in time." "He chose the timing," Ellis corrected. "I just left the door open." Recovery unfolded like fog, soft, unpredictable. There were good days, Monroe eating, stretching, standing without flinching, and bad ones, fever, restlessness. A night he growled low and distant, not at Ellis, but at something remembered. Bobcats heal slower than domestic cats. Their muscle mass works against quick recovery. Ellis studied every movement. He adjusted bedding, tracked hydration, offered food by hand when appetite dipped, not as a caretaker, as an equal. And slowly, the space shifted. Monroe stopped watching the exits. He slept longer. Let Ellis sit closer. One morning, he stretched and touched Ellis's boot with his paw. Just once. Ellis didn't cry, but he didn't move for 15 minutes. Healing wasn't a goalpost. It was 1,000 small moments that said, "I'm not done yet." Spring came early that year. Trees along the Providence River blushed pink, and children chased pigeons near the courthouse fountain. Ellis stood by Daniel's bench, alone, but lighter. Monroe wasn't at his side. He was behind the courthouse, pacing slowly through the planter beds. Free to go, still choosing to stay. Marcy had cleared him 2 weeks prior, fully mobile, no lingering fever, scar tissue permanent, but no longer obstructing motion. "He's good," she said. And he's wild. When he goes, he'll go for good." Ellis nodded, but didn't answer. Instead, he rebuilt the old trail marker in his backyard, cleaned the ranger tools Daniel once held, and each morning he poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one left steaming on the porch. And sometimes, just sometimes, Monroe would appear. One day a reporter stopped Ellis. "Is it true? The courthouse Bobcat? He really came inside?" Ellis smiled. "Number He invited me inside." The transformation wasn't in Monroe's healed paw. It was in Ellis's steadier hands, the way he laughed again with Marcy. The mornings he didn't dread. The man who swept floors was still there. But now, so was the ranger. So was the father. So was the hope. If this story reminded you that healing is a two-way street, subscribe now to join others who believe every connection changes us. Tell us in the comments who helped you come back to yourself even if they couldn't speak. It happened just after sunrise. No dramatic moment. No thunderclap or farewell howl. Just a shifting wind, a scent carried from the river, and a pause in the air like the world exhaled. Monroe stood at the edge of the tree line behind Ellis's home. His fur caught the soft gold of morning light. A jay chattered from a high branch, and the ground beneath him was warm with new grass. Ellis stood on the porch, coffee in hand, same old thermos, no leash, no call, just presence. Monroe didn't look like a pet. He looked like what he was always meant to be. Whole. He took one step, then another, toward the thicket that would carry him out of Providence, toward whatever waited beyond city edges and memory. But before he vanished into green, he stopped, he turned, and he looked back. The silence stretched. Ellis nodded once. No tears, no words. The bobcat blinked slowly, then turned again and disappeared into the trees. For a long time Ellis stood there, watching leaves sway where Monroe had passed. And in that moment he didn't feel grief. He felt honored. Because some creatures do not come to be owned or saved. They come to show us how to return to ourselves. Ellis didn't go back inside right away. He sat on the porch, sunlight on his shoulders, hand warm around his cup. And he smiled. Not because it ended, but because it happened. If this story moved you, thank you. And thank you, Judge Frank Caprio, for reminding the world that kindness isn't weakness. It's the quiet strength that makes us better, gentler, more human. Tell us in the comments, who taught you to be kinder just by the way they lived?